Hi, my name is Katie. I'm doing a video today about my son. My husband has been asking me to make a video. He feels like it might really help some people, and it's really been laid on his heart. This isn't exactly something that I like to do. I don't like to be in pictures, let alone video. And I don't even have the setup for it. I try to get my MacBook Air going today, and it needs updates. So if that tells you how much I really get on my computer. So this is on a cell phone. I'm just winging it. I have a few notes here that I'll go over. But I'm basically going to tell you a little bit of Mac's story. I won't go through all of it today, but I'll at least tell you about where we started. When I had Mac, he was an unplanned pregnancy. We got pregnant the first month we were married, and my husband was not supposed to be able to have kids. So it was a huge blessing, but we weren't ready, and we didn't want to do daycare. So we decided somebody had to stay home, and it ended up being my husband to stay home, and it was his decision because I made more money. I had a good paying corporate job, plus I also have my own business as an insurance broker, so it just made sense for me to work and for him to stay home. So I went to work as soon as Mac turned 6 weeks, and I worked a lot. My husband needed a $12,000 surgery. We have a house that we've been fixing up that when we moved into it, it was not good for anybody to be living in it. So we had a lot of money we needed to get the house livable. So basically that was my job, was to go and make money, and my husband stayed home with the kids and worked on the house, and then I helped him when I got home too. But we had a lot of things that we had to do because we didn't plan this pregnancy and we didn't think we could have kids. So basically we had Mac. Ken stayed home with Mac until he was about a year and a half. When he was a year and a half, we planned to have our daughter. So we had Kennedy. Our kids are about 16 months apart. Mac is just now going to be 2.5, and Kennedy is going to be a year this month. So anyway, I had Kennedy, and I actually had a good pregnancy, a good delivery. In comparison, Mac was 24 hours of labor. Kennedy was only 4. I put on a lot less weight with Kennedy than I did with Mac. And I had a way better job. I actually had switched jobs. I still had my corporate job and I had my job as a broker, but my new job that I had when I had Kennedy, it was a little more laid back. So I had a good 6-week maternity leave. I got to be a mom this time because I didn't end up in the hospital. Because after I had Mac, I ended up back in the hospital on morphine and a lot of antibiotics because I had endometritis. So it was just the first pregnancy, when I was pregnant with Mac and delivering him, it was just a nightmare. Kennedy's was just beautiful. It was so much better. And I got to be a mom for 6 weeks and even get to see Mac again and be a mom to him. I went back to work for a little while after having Kennedy, but I ended up getting kind of messed around on my pay over my maternity leave, and I took it pretty personally. So I ended up staying home, which I had told my husband for a while. I'm like, look, it's not, I don't like, I shouldn't say not like, it's really hard to be the main breadwinner and have the whole family depending on you. And I know I'll probably have people that hate me for saying this, but I feel like men are better equipped for that. Because it's natural for them to be the provider and they can handle the stress and they can leave it at the door. Me having 2 jobs and worrying about the family and, being a mom, it's stress. And yes, we can handle it and we can do a good job, but it weighs differently on us than it does on a man. So I kind of knew it was coming anyway, that I wanted to stay home with the kids. But then, it just kind of happened. When I got messed around on my commission and everything, I wanted to stay home. And then I prayed about it, and I said, God, if you want me to stay at home and be the wife that I'm supposed to be and be the mom I'm supposed to be, and do things differently, and you don't want my husband at home with the kids, then make a way. Even if it's like a management job or something, we need a way for him to be able to support us. And it was amazing. Another answered prayer, I got home, and his job had called and said, hey, we want to give you a job, and if you stick it out, we want to make you management. And so, that right there, we went and met him. He took it. And so that's where he is now. I stay at home with the kids. I still work sometimes like on the weekend or evening, but I'm 100% full time with the kids. They're actually taking a nap right now. That's why I'm able to do this video, but I'm also kind of hurrying to get this done because they're going to be waking up soon. So that's a little bit of our story. When I got Mac, I realized he was very behind. I said some things sometimes to my husband, but since he stayed home with the kids and I was just working, I just kind of took his word for it. Because I would say, Mac should be doing this or he should be doing that. And my husband's very protective of our son, understandably, and he's a very good dad. And he's like, no, he's fine. He's fine. He'll get there, whatever. I think it hit me on Mac's 2-year birthday when there's another 18-month-old sitting there that is eating with a fork and a spoon and drinking out of an open cup, and he's talking. And there's my son who still doesn't know how to eat with a fork and a spoon, doesn't know how to drink out of a cup, still takes a bottle. And I was just like, okay, enough's enough. Our son is behind, and I got to do something. So when I got Mac in September, I shouldn't say when I got him, when I was home with him, when I had him, it really kind of hit me how far behind he was because I was home with him 24/7. So where Mac was, he didn't really respond to his name. He didn't like to make eye contact. Every now and then he would cover his ears, like around the dishwasher. It wasn't consistent though. All he did was sit there at this windowsill right behind me and push his cars back and forth, back and forth. That's all he did. You couldn't break him away from it for nothing. He banged his head a lot. He's banged his head a lot since he was a little kid or little baby. And even that, I was like, that can't be normal. But I read that some boys can, but it also can be, everything I'm listing here can be autistic traits. So right away, I'm online researching like what's going on. And of course it brings up autism. And I looked up different ways to test him. Like, it seems like when kids are really, really autistic in these videos that people put up, you can't distract them. There's also things you can do, like they say, if they're not talking, do they at least communicate? Like, so we would say, show me, and give him our finger, and he'd show us what he wanted. So Mac did communicate at least through motions, and tried to show us stuff. What all did I look up? There was so much I looked up online that I was testing him because they say, do they really understand and have receptive language, or do you have to point at something and tell them and they don't really know? So it's like, okay, Mac, do you want to go outside, or do you want to put on your shoes? And I tested him to see from the other room, okay, did he have the receptive language, or did I have to point to show him? So then I was able to weed it out a little bit. I'm like, okay, yes, he does have a little receptive language. Yes, he does communicate through motion. So I'm like, okay, we have something to work with here. The other thing is, they say if you mess up the routine, they'll get really upset if they're autistic. So Mac was obsessed with his cars. That's all he wanted to do. So I would mess with the way he lined up his cars and saw if he freaked out. He didn't, thank God. I also just would kind of switch around his routine, which he didn't really have one anyway, but I would switch things around to see if it freaked him out. Thankfully, he didn't. So I was like, okay, if he's on the spectrum, then, it's very minor, very mild. So he banged his head a lot. He started screaming around 2 years. Every once in a while, he'd flap his hands. He'd cover his ears, but it wasn't all the time. And he said maybe 20 words, if that. He didn't talk very much at all. And like I said, he didn't drink out of an open cup. He didn't eat with a fork and a spoon. There wasn't much he did on his own at all at 2 years. So, of course, this was very upsetting for me because I know it's crazy, but I've never spent a ton of time around kids. And I hadn't spent a ton of time around my own to see it because I was doing 2 jobs. Anyway, I did a lot of praying. I prayed so much, just prayed, God, help me to teach my son, give me wisdom. I did a lot of research and I watched other people's videos on their children that were autistic. And then I also researched things I can do to help him, like what they did for autistic children, because I wanted to help him get caught up. And so I was trying to basically make sure I had every arrow I could have in my quiver, to be able to figure out what was going to work for our son. So after doing those little tests on him and seeing, yeah, he is there. And also, like, if he was playing with his cars, I'd say, Mac, Mac, or I'd smack my hands or clap my hands, anything I could, and he wouldn't turn around. But if I turned on the TV, he would turn around and see what it was. Or if something pulled up in the driveway, or if a car went by, he'd look, because he's just obsessed with cars. So I knew he was in there and not completely in that little world. So what I did, and this might not work for you, I'm just saying this is what I did. And if it's any help to you, I'm just hoping that maybe I can help. But it was very nerve-wracking. I'd sit there and I picked up a book and I started reading. I just started trying to do anything I could to get him to come away on his own terms, because if I tried to take him away from the cars, it didn't go well. So I picked up some of the books I'd always been reading him, like The Very Hungry Caterpillar, and I just started reading them, and I started acting like I was having a lot of fun with them. And at first it was one book and then two books, and then I had to pull out a toy. But eventually, if I'm sitting there doing enough stuff, and I was like a few feet away from him, like maybe 2 feet, doing all these things, like right there, kind of close where he could hear me, see me out of the side of his eye. If I kept playing long enough and having fun long enough, eventually Mac turned around. He wanted to see what all the fun was, and then he'd end up in my lap and he would play with me. And it didn't last very long. And then I would grab something else. I just kept going. And so even when I lost him, instead of pulling him back over, I would just keep going, and eventually he would keep coming back over and rejoining, coming back over and rejoining. Your kid, it might be something completely different, like as far as what they react to, if this even works. But with Mac, it was books and some of the interactive toys. And these are like the first days. Mind you, this was September and it's January. It actually hasn't been very long, and it's actually pretty cool how far Mac has come. The other thing is, instead of reading the book, I started just pointing things out, because I've always read to Mac since he was a baby. But at some point he lost interest, and I think it's because, well, I was reading, but he didn't understand what I was reading. So when I was pointing, like The Very Hungry Caterpillar, he would say caterpie and try to say caterpillar. And he'd go through every page and want to point out the caterpillar. And he'd look at me and I'd say, yes, caterpillar. Like every time he said it, he had to look at me and make sure he said it right. And then we would add to it. Once he had caterpillar, oh, there's the sun. He had to point out every single sun. The dinosaur books. And then we'd do the dinosaurs and then point out the trees and then point out the water. And it was kind of slow, but he started really picking up the more we did it. And he started gaining more words quicker and building on it. He did get stuck on things sometimes, like tree. There's a tree, 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 tree. So I'd acknowledge it, but eventually I had to kind of start to move on, but I couldn't push him to move on. If he wanted to point out every tree, then we pointed out every tree. So it's kind of like gentle leading, if you will. Like, you don't want to force them to do something, because if you force them, they're going to push you out. To give you an example, when I first stayed home with Mac, I freaked out because he wasn't talking, didn't know any of his ABCs. And I'm seeing other kids that are, oh my gosh, comparing your kid to other kids is just, kids are everywhere, as far as where they're at with their learning, and it can just drive you insane. But I was trying to do ABCs and kept doing it over and over because I'm just trying to play with him and trying to get to know my son better. And it got to one point where we're in the truck with the family, and I turned around, A, B, C, D, and he actually covered his ears. And of course, part of me's freaking out, like, oh my gosh, is he autistic? And the other part of me was like, wait a minute, he's not ready for it yet. So I did find other ways to introduce things to him, like the ABCs, for example. We were very strict on no TV, no TV. But I have found that it's actually been a pretty good resource. So if I needed a break and Mac needed a break, but I wanted him to learn, but it wasn't so pressured and one-on-one, it's more of a passive learning. I actually found some educational videos online. One of them that we used was called Little Baby Bum. It's very annoying and very repetitive, but 15 minutes, he needed a break, I needed a break, I turned it on, and he actually really enjoyed the singing, and he likes the videos. I did end up interacting with him though. So instead of just sticking him in front of the TV and playing on my phone or something, I actually would either sit beside him or I'd go in front of the TV and actually say, A, or, tree, or whatever we're pointing out or learning. I did it with him with the video. So I was still interacting, but it wasn't as much pressure as direct one-on-one. Like I said, it was a little more passive. But I also did short spurts because he could sit in front of that TV. He became obsessed with that. So we did short spurts. Okay, so we went over the books again, pointing them out. The other thing is, in the research that I found, there was another lady that talked about a speech delay. And she said that one thing she did was kind of like the little baby bum videos, it was repetition. So when I was teaching him something new, and I was using the books that we had at the time, so it was like the caterpillar book, the dinosaur book, or what have you. But when he really took off with that quick, it was crazy how quick he picked that up. I went and got my 100 First Words at Walmart, this book here. He loved this book. Of course, he got stuck on the tractor page in the cars, but that's okay too. But I would just try to bring in the other pages, and eventually he was doing it. But anyway, the lady said say things 3 times was key. So I started doing, for example, duck, 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 baby, 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 banana, banana, banana. It will drive you mad and drain you, but it worked. Saying it 3 times, pointing at it, and just going through it. And when they're done, they're done. If they want to turn the page, turn the page. Like I might be looking at broccoli and he wanted to turn it to the ball. Fine. Just wherever he turned it to, I'd ball, ball, ball. And you can tell when they get frustrated or they get tired. So like if he started just kind of wanting to go back to his cars, or he didn't want to look at it anymore, or even banging his head, I just stopped and moved on to something else. They do say kids have very short attention spans. The crazy thing is Mac doesn't fit into that. He actually has a very good attention span, and he might get it from me because when I do something, I want to do it 100%. I want to learn it. I want to master it. Mac, he wants to work on something until he masters it. That's just how he is. You got to gauge it going off your own kid. So we actually did a lot in those books. It was crazy. The other thing is Mac didn't have a routine. When his dad had him, Mac took a nap whenever. And then at night, he got to roll around on the floor until he fell asleep. And sometimes Mac fell asleep at 10. Sometimes he fell asleep at midnight. And I finally said, enough's enough. He's going to go to bed, and if he has to cry, he's going to cry. Mac took to it very quickly. So he has a certain time we get up. We have a certain time for nap time. And we have a set bedtime. And it took a little bit of crying at first, but it did great. And he actually has blossomed a lot. And I really feel, too, that one of the best things you can do for your kid is set a routine, because they need to know what to plan on, too. And it's crazy because even after a week or two of doing even these few things in a routine, it was really cool to see, because then about a week or two in, he'd get up from eating breakfast and I was still feeding his sister, and he'd come into the living room with his books, and he'd come in the doorway and look at me like, "Are you coming, Mom?" Because he was ready to, what I call, study. Even though it was fun, we studied. He wanted to learn. And that's another thing, is you got to find what makes him tick. And Mac, this is what makes him tick. He is an intellectual kid and he likes to learn, so I'm feeding off of that. So we got the books. Again, I kind of stopped reading them. I just started kind of pointing things out, and that made it simple enough. Because if you're making it a little too complicated, at least for Mac, if you made it too complicated and get ahead of them, they're going to shut you down. We did the TV. We interacted. Also, like I had like an ABC puzzle that someone got. It's an Elmo case, and it's got the ABCs. We played with that, and he got, again, obsessed with it. He mastered it. My uncle was here not too long ago, and he said my kid couldn't even do that at 3. And it was also crazy too, because he learned the ABCs individually and not just through like the song. Like Mac can pick up a T and say T, and the next thing he pick up a Z and say Z. Like he actually really knows it. And I guess that's not typical. Certain people that I've seen him have said that's not typical for them to actually know it, and not just, there's a word for it. But to not just know it by like muscle memory, because I can't think of the word. He also learned his 1 through 10, his colors, his shapes. He knows all the way up to octagon. But that's another video because I'm kind of doing where we started. Because if you're watching this and if you got a 2-year-old and you're just, it's just now kind of hitting you, something's not right, you might be where I was. So I'm trying to talk about where we were. The YouTube videos, like I said, definitely educational. We didn't do SpongeBob or like Amazon Prime has Tumbleleaf. Yes, Tumbleleaf, for example, is supposed to be an educational video, but if your child can't talk, what are they learning? So I had to go to something like, more toddler driven. Like the Little Baby Bum really is perfect. I'm not getting any money for saying that, but they do the ABCs, the 1, 2, 3s, the colors. That's what I did, and I interacted. Like I said, you definitely want to interact with them too. But definitely repetition is key. So, and you got to find what makes them tick. Your kid might not want to look at pictures in a book. Another thing I did was when Mac was so obsessed with his cars that I would just point out blue car or truck, or I worked with what he was working with. But I did also try to get him away from him. And that was the cool thing, is when I did sit down and read those videos or read those books or play with the toys, after some time of listening, eventually he did come over. And it was cool because about a few weeks in, he didn't even play with his cars. He didn't even go over to them because he was used to our routine. Another thing I did is when I did finally have him away from the cars, after a few weeks of doing this, I kind of had stations. So I had like all the books. We'd pull out the books and just pick some. And then after 15, 20 minutes, however long, and he got tired of that, then we had the crayons. And I would try to show him how to scribble with crayons. And then we had Play-Doh. And there's a really cool ABC Play-Doh set where they can stamp. And he loved that too, because another way to keep sharpening his ABCs. Plus he's learning and with the Play-Doh, and I could tell him, push hard, and so he knows how to push. And, gosh, every educational toy I had, the stacking rings, everything, I just kept moving him because these are things we played with anyway. But the focus for me was trying to keep Mac entertained enough to keep him interacting and to realize that interaction is a fun thing and to keep him away from those cars. Because what I feel really happened was, and you might be in the same boat, I don't know, but like my husband, they said that he was a really easy kid and he played on his own all the time. Yeah, that might be a good thing, but it's also not exactly a good thing because then they're not developing social. And like I said, before you know it, oh, he's easy, he's happy playing with his cars. Well, next thing you know, he's 2 years old, not hardly talking, not eating with a fork and a spoon or anything. So, it's just anything you can do to keep your son or daughter involved and keep them using their head and thinking and interacting, and just the interaction alone. I mean, my phone, I was not on my phone. My phone was put away. I didn't answer texts. We stuck to our schedule. They had fun. It was at work. It was a lot of work for me. I was very tired. I was stressed. Every day I put him down for his nap and just cried because I was where he was. I was worried that somehow, something was wrong with him, that I did something, that I didn't do something. And I just prayed and prayed to help my son. So, again, if they start to pull away, try something else. These are the things that worked for my son. If your son really loves the spoons or the pots and pans or something, talk about the spoons, talk about the pots and pans. But also, if they like to get stuck on things like my kid, try to find a couple different things and just keep moving them, whether they get tired or they get stuck after a while, keep moving them around. Let's see. We did a routine, educational toys, just anything you can think of, put in front of them, you're going to find what makes them tick. Not all kids are going to react the way that Mac did. Like, I know some kids actually really are autistic or have something wrong. And Mac might actually have a little bit of autism, but he was good enough to pass the MCHAT. Like, sometimes I still wonder if he's not on the spectrum even a little bit, because he does have some tics. Oh, the head banging too. I started really just discouraging him, telling him no, putting my hand in front of his head, trying to stop him. He doesn't really do it now. The only time he really does it now is if he's in pain. And even then, I do try to stop him or distract him. But you got to really listen to your kid, listen to their cues. If your kid is happy doing whatever on their own, yes, it might be nice and it might be easy, but I personally feel like that might be one of the worst things you can do. Especially when I first stayed home with Mac, I went from he was a daddy's boy to everywhere he went, he had to have mom. He'd wave his hand, mom. He wanted mom. He wanted me doing everything with him. And that told me itself that he actually really wanted his mom the whole time. And I think also is I was also, in a lack of better words, I was liberating him because I was exposing him to all different kinds of things. And this is what he was hungry for. And I really feel like maybe that's why he kind of shelled up and withdrew it within to himself. I don't know if it was that or that we had his sister. He didn't do good with that, but something made him just withdraw. But if there's anything you want to know, post it in the comments. I will update you. By the way, there's a happy ending to this. I'll keep moving along and making more videos, but again, I wanted to focus on if you're where I was with my son, anything I can do to help. And if I think of anything else, I'll let you know. Or if you have any questions, please comment and I'll make sure and answer it. But just to tell you where Mac is now, Mac knows his entire ABCs. He knows, oh my gosh, about 200 words. He's about to be out of early intervention. He's, oh my gosh, he knows his 1 to 10. He knows all his colors, all his shapes. He's very outgoing. And now what we're focusing on is his social, because Mac didn't know how to be social before because also he couldn't communicate. So now that Mac is able to communicate, now we're working on the social stuff. And that's something I'll get on too, is when you find what makes your kid tick, if they're anything like my kid, he's going to want to do it and do it and do it and master it. And then you're going to come to a plateau. And that's where I always have to almost try to stay one step ahead of Mac and play around and see what he needs now, what we need to do now. And, I was doing preschool videos because he's already got all the toddler stuff. But I realized he's not quite ready for that. So now we're working on the social. We're working on verbs because now he needs to make sentences. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's doing ball, chair. So, now we got to do the verbs. And you might do this better than I did. I'm saying this is just what I figured out. And honestly, it's been on my own because I had to figure out why he wasn't making sentences, why he was using fillers. And I thought about it for a whole day, and then I figured out, okay, this is it. And just to give you a little touch of what I did, once he knew all these words and everything, I figured out, again, what makes him tick. So I was showing him how to play with his trucks, because he does still play with his cars and trucks every now and then. And so I wanted to show him new plays to imaginary play with it. So I turned on monster trucks, and he loved it. But then I'm also narrating it. I'm like, ooh, that was a big jump, or uh-oh, he fell down. Is he okay? And so that's where hopefully you'll get to. I wouldn't do that yet. You could try it. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing what worked for me. But again, let me know if there's anything else you want to know. This is a quick video on my iPhone. Again, I'm sorry that it's shaky and that I don't have perfect lighting or even a nice shirt on. I got a shirt with spit up and everything on it. But I'm also not trying to be real fake. I want to be real with you guys. And I don't know, just anything you want to see or want to know, let me know. And I will try to make more of these and see if we're even able to help one person. That will definitely make it worth it. Thanks.